Part 116. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 1154. Gretel stood in the street blankly. Those bright ribbons, soft curtains, and exquisite curtains with statues of gods, one by one, floated on the street. Around the end of the square, there was a particularly tall and magnificent building that almost completely covered it. In contrast, the clothes of pedestrians on the street were much more ragged. Those original white, gray, rough homespun cloths were stretched thin on the upper body, half of the calf was exposed underneath, and were full of patches and holes. When the cold wind blew over, many of the pedestrians carrying pots on their heads, baskets on their backs, or carrying heavy objects shivered subconsciously. How much of what they grow belongs to them? Greet asked softly. He didn't expect an answer at first, but soon, Ayamank moved in front of him and leaned down respectfully. Distinguished guests, according to the decree of the kingdom, the king protects us and the gods look after us. Therefore, 1/3 of what we cultivate, raise livestock, and catch fish belongs to the king, 1/3 belongs to the temple, and the remaining 3/3 belonging to the whole community. Wait, what is community? Gretel interrupted. The tax rate of 67% is very high, but if there are no additional layers of exploitation, you can still survive. In my previous life, I heard that some landowners divided their accounts with their tenant farmers at a rate of 30-70, or even 20-80. Community is how we, the people, are organized. Ayamank continued to answer respectfully. For example, the lowest level is the chanka, which consists of 10 families and is cared for and managed by an official. The next higher level is the picha, which consists of 5 chankas. The next level above, 2 picha form a pishika. In other words, captain of 10, captain of 50s, centurion, Greet translated silently in his mind. He said casually. How many levels are there in total? Which level are you at? There are 10 levels in total. The top ones are the Anu of 10,000 households and the Iliku of 40,000 households. They both belong to the king only. I am just a humble Manu, who governs 2 Pishika. Therefore, this little nobleman is actually just a mayor who oversees 200 households, maybe a village chief. He is really the smallest and smallest noble, he cannot be smaller. Gretel refrained from rubbing his forehead. If there are several 40,000 households in a kingdom, then even the daughters of the heads of 200 households will be taken to be sun virgins. How many girls will be sacrificed in total? 400? 800? 1002? Even more? His eyes unconsciously turned to the tall buildings in the distance. Ayamank followed his gaze and shook his head. Dear guest, do you want to talk to the temple and ask them if they can buy moonlight sand? This is not necessary. The monks in the temple only serve the gods and the virgin sun, and only guard the sun holy fire. We do all these chores. Huh? Is there a sun virgin in the temple here too? Cyrilla probed her head. Didn't it say that it was only available in the royal capital? Didn't it mean that only the royal capital would collect these girls in large numbers and make them sacrifices? Why is there one here? Of course there will be, every temple needs sun virgins to guard the sacred fire. Ayamank smiled hard. From his eyes, Gretel clearly read, it would be great if my daughter could also enter here, it would be great if my daughter could also enter the local temple. But it was obvious that the messenger who took away his daughter came from the capital and directly received orders from the great temple in the capital. Therefore, even though he was a noble, he had no way to change his daughter's fate and could only watch her being taken away. Gretel sighed at him and nodded reassuringly. Then, he turned his attention to the temple in the distance. Can I go in and have a look? The temple of the god of war, where he often gave lectures, had already almost leveled the threshold. Although I am not very familiar with the spring goddess temple, I have been there a few times. I have seen the layout inside, the statues, and the holy power flowing on the statues. He had participated in the dwarves' god sacrifice rituals, and he had chosen the totem poles and totem spirits of the barbarians. Even the gods of the tribes in the New World, he had seen them all along the way, and each had its own characteristics. The Lord of Glory, well, forget about that, but over the years, I have fought many warriors and priests of the Lord of Glory, and I understand their power characteristics. This is the only temple I haven't seen before. Is the faint golden glow on the top of the temple a manifestation of the power of the sun god? Inside the temple, the singing sounds carried by the wind, are they songs to worship the gods? What is the power system of their priests, or monks? What is the difference between the divine power of the sun god and the holy power of the Lord of Glory? As an emergency doctor in her previous life, Greet didn't have that much time to play around. In this life, I treat myself as a tourist, and I have aroused great curiosity about the folk customs of various places. Besides, isn't this the teacher's instruction? Between level 10 and 15, it is best to travel around the world and see different scenery. With the speed at which he advanced to the first level in half a year and advanced to the first level in half a year, there was not much time left for him. Gretel thought confidently and looked to Idian inquiringly. Idian has also been paying attention to the little cub he brought out. Seeing this, he nodded and smiled at him. Go and see if you want. Their temple is relatively friendly. As long as you remain polite, they do not prevent outsiders from worshipping the sun god. Luja, you go with them. Sarala cheered a little and walked quickly over there. Gretel raised a smile to Idian and immediately followed. Just be polite, right? Hey, I am most familiar with this. I go to the temple to worship Buddha and burn incense in front of the gods. There is no psychological pressure at all. Sure enough, the temple of the sun does not refuse outsiders entry. Especially when he saw two beautiful girls with long ears, and a warrior who was half taller than ordinary people. Knowing that they were outsiders, a warrior guarding the gate ran away and went inside to invite people. Gretel and others stood at the gate for a while, and then they saw a young monk in a hurry, who was called out by the gatekeeper. When he saw them, he was slightly startled, then immediately stepped forward with a smile. Dear guests, are you here to worship the great sun god? Yes. Gretel took a step forward and answered on behalf of everyone. The young monk looked at him carefully, his wary look flashing across his face. Immediately, he looked at the outsiders next to him, and a smile appeared on his face. Guest, please come inside. The sun shines on all things, and the sun god will not reject anyone who worships him. Please come with me to understand the greatness and grace of the sun god. Greet looked around and followed him inside. Walking in, there are dim or bright curtains floating on the pillars, beams, and window lattice. On the curtains, streamers, and various hanging fabrics, you can see statues of gods with simple shapes and lines similar to stone carvings or bronzes. Even though the further you go in, the taller the house becomes and the deeper it becomes, the light in the main hall is not dimmed at all. All the curtains and draperies are emitting bright or dark, thick or light golden light. These statues are the devout offerings of believers. Seeing Gretel's gaze fixed on him, the monk who guided him pointed to the nearest curtain and said softly. Hung throughout the temple, after being worshipped by monks and believers day by day, they have been soaked with the power of the sun god. The innermost statues of the gods, even the Virgin of the Sun, spun, dyed and woven with their own hands before they could be hung in the middle of the main hall. Except the offerings from the priests. Is that why they glow? Greet asked quietly. The monk who led the way nodded and made a prayer gesture on his chest. Even if night comes, the power of the sun god will always surround us. Gretel took a deep breath, stood in front of the largest statue in the center of the temple, and bowed slightly. The statue was roughly square, hanging from the top beam of the temple to the ground. It was at least 6 meters by 6 meters in size. It had complex patterns and bright colors. I don't know how many virgins of the sun took so much effort to weave such a large statue of a god. I don't know what other fabrics are woven into the cotton yarn, reflecting the brilliance of stars under the light. Although it was a little yellow and black due to the lamp oil, the flowing golden light was also the strongest. It's just that Gretel doesn't know why, but he always feels that the golden light above is not the kind of vibrant, clear, and transparent, the first ray of dawn that rises in the morning. It is not the sun at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, nor the blazing sunshine at noon. On the contrary, the golden light flowing on it condensed a layer of bronze. When I relax my mind and feel it, I always feel like a sunset, which is about to set, struggling on the mountain tops, treetops, and coastline in the west. This sunlight. Beside her, Sarala seemed to feel something as she whispered. Gretel cast a quick glance at her to stop her from continuing, and turned to the monk who was leading the way. The brilliance and warmth of the sun god left a very deep impression on us. I hope that I can invite a statue of the sun god to take home to worship and feel his brilliance all the time. Is that okay? The monk who led the way hesitated. Look at Gretel, and then look at the other guests around him. According to the law of the temple, except for officials and nobles above Pishika, only the priests of the temple can take away the statues. I am also a noble from the other side of the ocean, Greet replied calmly. He raised his head and glanced at the statue, then cast his gaze into the depths of the temple. Do you need me to prove my identity to you, or to the high priest of the temple? Please move inside. The young monk pondered for a moment, then turned around and moved forward. Gretel followed him around the statue, and just as he reached the back door of the hall, there was a sudden noise in front of him. Don't run! Don't run! Get her! The sound of armor scraping, weapons clanking, and chaotic footsteps swarmed in. And in front of all the noise, a ball of golden light suddenly burst out. Let me go! Let me go! The chasing crowd froze. Among the crowd, a soft figure rushed out, his whole body covered in golden light, his hair disheveled, and his voice was shrill. I've had enough. I don't want to die. Let me go. If you stop me again, everyone will die together. Before Gretel had time to react, the priestess bumped towards them with her long skirt in hand. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @Excalibur Toothpick for the 100 starting coins reward. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 1155. The moment the Virgin of the Sun rushed over, Gretel reflexively took a step back. He flicked his fingers, brushed, and gave himself a row of defensive spells. At the same time, Sarala took a step across and stood in front of him. Well, there is a possibility of a fight. The mage retreats and the warrior moves forward. Didn't you notice that Bernard was following him? He stood behind him, as solid as an iron tower, and felt particularly safe. The escaping Virgin of the Sun was originally running toward them in a state of embarrassment, carrying her long skirt. There is a sense of panic and no choice but to grab a handful of straw, even if it is straw. However, seeing Gretel retreating and a slender, delicate, and beautiful girl standing in front of her, her expression suddenly changed. She stopped and turned around. Tear, a crisp tearing sound. Then, Gretel's expression also changed. The Sun Virgin tore open the long skirt she was carrying. With 2 brushes, the long skirt turned into a short skirt that only reached 2 inches above the knee. She held the remaining skirt in her hands, twisting it and waving it. A masterpiece of golden light. In her hands, the skirt looked like a statue of a god, or rather, a preparation for a statue of a god. In short, it was a piece of cloth soaked with divine power. When it exploded, Gretel subconsciously closed his eyes. He was like this even when he was standing behind the Virgin of the Sun. The pursuers who caught up were simply staggering around and subconsciously avoiding them. If you look at it from above, it looks like half of a flower suddenly exploded. The Virgin of the Sun waved her skirt to drive back her pursuers, then turned around and killed them. She grabbed a spear from the pursuer and swung it in a circle, drawing a 3/4 arc circle. The wind roared fiercely on the tip of the spear, and golden light flashed. This forced the group of pursuers to stagger and retreat. One young soldier simply fell to the ground. Gretel slowly opened his mouth. "Sister, where is the Virgin of the Sun who we promised to serve the Sun God and protect the holy fire? What about the Virgin of the Sun, who was said to have a daily job of spinning and weaving curtains and idols? I don't think you look like it. Your lunge is extended, your hands are holding the spear one after another, and the spear is swung like a wind. You have already caught up with the senior warriors. Sun Virgin, and samurai types." The surprise on his face was too obvious. Luoxia laughed, and then explained to him. "The Virgin of the Sun, according to legend, will enter the palace and become the concubine of the Sun God. According to the myth here, during the divine war, the concubines will follow the Sun God and go to the battlefield together. Therefore, some with particularly good qualifications virgins of the Sun will also be trained as warriors." "That's it?" Gretel nodded silently, his mind still not turning around. "So there are several types of Sun virgins. The low-end ones are considered palace maids, the mid-range ones are considered female officials, and the high-end ones are considered concubines of gods. Different identities, different trainings. But no matter what, it is better to see a Sun Virgin who will resist bravely and fight for her life than to see a Sun Virgin who will cry and run over to pull them into the water." Not only was Greet in a good mood, but Cyrilla also took a step forward, eager to protect this girl. After taking a step, they suddenly stopped, turned around, and asked the monk who led them, "What's going on?" She raised her voice deliberately when she said this, and the lingering sound spread to the other side. An old priest just walked out of the pursuers. He wanted to shout angrily, but he stopped and looked at them carefully. Seeing that Gretel and his gang had a unique appearance and full of momentum, they didn't dare to make any mistakes. They turned to Sun Virgin and shouted, "Taya! Put down your weapons. Let's talk about anything you have to say. You are a virgin who serves the Sun God. What do you look like dressed like this in front of outsiders?" "I can't talk if I put down my weapons," Taya retorted even more fiercely. "You also know that I am a virgin of the Sun. I am a virgin of the Sun. No man should even come in where we live. You dash. Shut up." The old priest's expression changed drastically and he stopped and shouted. Before he finished speaking, Delavan Losha had already walked forward. With a shake of his hand, a grey-green cloak fell lightly on Taya. She turned to the front of the Virgin of the Sun and carefully pulled Tia's cloak up. With a wave of his fingers, the two sides of the cloak were tightly closed and adhered to each other, making it seamless. The soft fabric fell gently from Taya's shoulders to her ankles, quietly and properly, without even half an inch of skin being exposed. After doing all this, the elf spellcaster retreated and returned to the team, without saying a word from beginning to end. The old priest's angry shout was interrupted by this, and his face turned pale and red and white again. After a long time, I struggled to come up with one sentence. "What are you doing? You said that dressing like this in front of outsiders doesn't look good," Luoxia replied lightly. She returned the old priest's words and lowered her eyes, as if everything had nothing to do with her. Gretel tried his best to hold back his laughter. "The point is, that elf cloak is wind-resistant, warm, waterproof, and moisture-proof, and it also comes with several magic spells. Everyone's cloak has different spells attached to it, and Greet doesn't know what it comes with, but there are probably 1 or 2 protective spells: invisibility, flying, etc. In other words, if Taya makes good use of the magic of this elf cloak, maybe, she can escape? The old priest's face looked uncertain. He looked at Taya, at Greet and his party, and at the monks, warriors and other people of all kinds standing around, and let out a long sigh. Please come over to the high priest. When the high priest came over, the group of people had been led to the back of the temple and sat down in a smaller hall. The monks from the temple came and went, carrying wooden trays and bringing warm drinks to Gretel and others. After they each took a cup, they brought the wooden tray to the high priest. A hot milky white drink served in a thick, somewhat rough earthenware cup. Sarah held the cup and curiously observed the patterns on the cup body, using her fingers to trace the black and red lines and the dancing little figures. Bernard and Lucia both picked up their glasses and drank without looking. Of course, Bernard relied on the barbarian's physical strength and strong resistance to poison. Lucia, Gretel suspected that she had secretly lost the detect poison spell. Gretel himself must throw away the poison detection spell. The fingertips flickered, and she touched the rim of the cup gently, and then she put down the cup gently with a straight face. The spell showed that there was some poison in this drink, not strong, it could even be said to be quite weak, but it was indeed there. Judging from the fact that they drink the same drink as the high priest, the toxicity may not be directed at them, but that the daily drinks of local monks contain certain psychotropic ingredients. To be honest, this is not surprising among indigenous monks. Taya sat alone, keeping a straight face and saying nothing, and did not pick up the earthenware cup on the wooden plate. There was a long strip protruding from the bottom of the elf's cloak. It was obvious that she had not let go of the spear until she walked here. Greet nodded secretly, looked at the high priest, and waited for him to speak. You invited us over, what's the matter? You don't have to be in a daze. The high priest glanced past Taya and wanted to say something, but held back. He turned to Greet and the others, his eyes lingered on a few people, and finally he aimed at Greet. Dear guests who have come from afar, thank you for visiting the temple, and thank you for your respect for the sun god. I heard from Paro, do you want to bring back a statue of the sun god? That's what I thought. Gretel noticed his subtle expression and frowned secretly. Among the group of people, Luoxia is the elder in terms of age, and Luoxia is the strongest in terms of strength. She was the one who spoke before and put the cloak on Virgin of the Sun. That's it, you still chose yourself to talk to. Do you think you are easy to talk to, or do you simply think that he, a male, is the one who makes the decision among the group? Thinking this way, when he spoke, he was a little rude. But now, I am a little hesitant. It is said that the statues in the temple are all woven by devout sun virgins. The sun virgins who were forced to rush out of the temple can really bring the sun with them. God's blessing. The high priest's face suddenly darkened. He flicked the ribbon on his chest. It was a ribbon woven from extremely fine colored alpaca hair and studded with beads of various colors. Even its body was almost covered. Looking at the sun virgin beside him, he said coldly. Taya, what did you say? We have indeed been treated unfairly, Taya responded with her head raised. She stretched out her left hand from under the cloak, with her 5 fingers together, the fingertips pointing upward, and the nails glittered with gold. In the name of the sanctity of the sun god Virakaka. In the name of my piety. We, the sun virgins in the temple, have been harassed by outsiders for a long time. As she spoke, a faint golden light always shrouded her body, and even became stronger and stronger, coating the gray-green cloak with a layer of golden light. Obviously, this sun virgin has indeed received the favor and attention of the sun god, and even at this time, it has not faded. Some people keep invading our territory and bullying our sisters. Some even want to give our sisters to outsiders to enjoy. Taya, you must have evidence when you say this. The high priest asked solemnly. Taya raised her head fearlessly. I am willing to identify. I am willing to perform a divination ceremony before God to prove my honesty and innocence. If I lie, I, Tia, the Virgin of the Sun, would rather be pierced by 100 spears. As you wish. The high priest stood up sullenly. Soon, a long row of sacrifices was laid out in front of the statue in the temple hall, with a row of monks standing on the left and right. Gretel and others were also at the end of the monks' team, looking curiously. Divination ceremony before gods? What is the divination ceremony before the sun god like? Will God directly perform miracles? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. During special periods, book reviews will not be displayed for the time being. They will be released in a few days, but they will be visible in the author's background. So don't be stingy with book reviews. No book review writer would be sad. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 1156. The rituals of offering sacrifices to the sun god and asking for divination are obviously done very well in the temple. As soon as Tia mentioned it and the high priest agreed, everything was quickly prepared in the temple. A piece of bluestone half the length of a man, smooth and dark black, with a long groove in the middle. Below the groove, there is a large stone basin supporting it. According to Greet's estimation, there is absolutely no problem in holding 5 or 6 liters of water. 2 golden pheasants with colorful feathers, one bright and one dull. According to Gretel's understanding, they are probably a male and female pair. A strange, hairless hound. Since its skin is very similar to a hairless cat, Greet suspected that the dog was born hairless. And a variety of other items. Such as fish, such as shells, such as various birds. The most important item was a pure white alpaca, which was led by 2 middle-aged monks in luxurious clothes and pulled under the statue of the sun god. The temple was filled with smoke. 2 sun virgins wearing pure white robes and colorful ribbons on their heads appeared gracefully, each holding a lamp, and respectfully lit the bronze brazier under the statue. They avoided Tia's gaze and stood with their heads down by the brazier with some fear. His eyes were fixed on the oil lamp in his hand and the flickering candle light. From beginning to end, he didn't even look at Tia. You have thought about it. The high priest stood in front of the statue, letting the smoke fill the 2 braziers, almost smearing his face. He looked straight at Tia and said in a calm voice. It's still too late to ask for forgiveness. If you start to identify and ask for divination, if the result of the divination is not what you say, then you have only one way to go. How could such thick smoke not make him cough or make him shed tears? Gretel threw a bubble spell at himself, which was completely supported by magic, and looked over from behind the Virgin of the Sun. What kind of magic is attached to this old man? The smoke rising from the brazier did not avoid his head and face at all, forming a clean space around him. With a clang sound, the spear fell to the ground. In front of the high priest, Tia, the Virgin of the Sun, straightened her back and met his gaze without fear. If I had a false word, or if my piety could not evoke a response from the sun god, I would rather be pierced by 100 spears. She took off her elf cloak, folded it neatly, and held it in front of Luja with both hands. When staring at the female elf caster, the Sun Virgin lowered her head slightly, and the light in her eyes flickered gently. These guests, especially this noble and beautiful woman, really saved her life. She took up her cloak, stepped back, and turned around. He unfolded the hem of the skirt that had been torn off by himself, and carefully circled it along the damaged area. The soft palms gently brushed it, and the torn parts glowed with golden light, and were immediately reconnected to the hem of the knee-length skirt. Not prosthetics. It's not true. The hem of the skirt was only temporarily glued on, and it was not completely repaired. If it was a repair surgery, there should be no trace at all now. However, this also shows that she does have the ability to cast spells. She is still favored by the sun god. In the spiritual connection, Greet, Cyrilla, and Lucia were discussing quietly, watching Taya move forward slowly and solemnly. As she walked, she adjusted her crown, straightened her hair, and tightened her belt again. The golden crown shone on her long brown-black hair, like a small sun, and like the light of the sun god, pouring directly on her. The pure white and simple robe is tied up with a wide and strong light yellow belt. The upper and lower sides of the belt are decorated with ochre red edges, which echo the ochre red piping on the cuffs and corners of the robe, adding a touch of luxury to the robe. The long, silky hair hangs down to her waist. Several thin braids are braided into the long hair that covers her entire back. Thin gold pieces bind the braided legs, and a subtle light shines in the black hair. The overall image is both luxurious and solemn. If someone told Greet now that Tia was the highest-ranking priestess of this temple, he would definitely believe it. It's a pity that she is about to die, Luoxia whispered quietly through the spiritual connection. Greet couldn't help being surprised. Why? Look at the sacrifice prepared for her. The high-level elf spellcaster is much more senior and experienced than Gretel in this regard. She pointed quietly. Golden pheasants, hairless dogs, fish, shells, various birds, and alpacas. If it were an ordinary small sacrifice, such a sacrifice would be good, but if you want to call the sun god's attention, these things are simply not enough. Not enough. There are no magical beasts, there are not a large number of wild beasts that can provide abundant vitality, and there are no human sacrifices. Such sacrifices will not work. Isn't this intentional to harm her? Cyrilla almost jumped up. Why? Who is right and who is wrong? Just ask the sun god to come down and let God judge. But God doesn't come casually in the spiritual connection, Luoxia sighed softly. God, even if he is God, whether he shows miracles, accepts prayers from believers, or even directs his gaze, all consume power. If you do not provide enough power, you will not be able to attract him to come. But, Cyrilla said anxiously. Luoxia turned her face, looked into her eyes, and shook her head slightly. Powerful and extremely concentrated spiritual power can also attract the attention of gods. In other words, if this Sun Virgin is strong enough, or her will to complain about grievances is strong enough, even if the sacrifice is not enough, she can also attract the attention of gods. Surrender, but, however, the price for triggering a divine descent is likely to be her life. Gretel added softly in his mind. In the center of the hall, Taya had already walked to the bluestone and picked up a thin obsidian knife from the tray in the monk's hand. Then, he grabbed a golden pheasant with his left hand, and wiped it into the throat of the golden pheasant with his right hand. Blood flowed profusely. In Gretel's heart, for some reason, he said, I don't want half a star of blood to be spilled in the world of mortals, all I have to do is practice hanging on the 8-foot flag and spear. Wake up, that is the blood of the sacrifice, not the blood of the wronged person himself. There is no Zangerbalion hanging on the flag gun here, only the statue of the sun hanging high above. If it sprays on the statue, wouldn't it be blasphemous? A stream of blood spurted into the groove in the middle of the bluestone, and then trickled into the stone basin below. Without stopping, Taya cut the throat with a knife, opened the belly of the golden pheasant with a knife, pulled out the heart, and threw it into the brazier. In an instant, a strange-shaped smoke rose from the brazier. Gretel immediately saw that the eyes of all the priests, monks, and even the 2 sun virgins holding lamps were fixed on the brazier. There is no vision. There were no visions. It seems that the sun god has not arrived. Fortunately, this is the first sacrifice, and there are many more to come. Cyrilla said softly in the spiritual connection. Taya kept moving, stretched out her blood-stained right hand, and grabbed another golden pheasant. Cut the throat, disembowel the body, throw away the heart. He looked up and saw that there was still no sign, so he grabbed the hairless dog again. This sister's movements are so neat. Even such a thin stone knife has no cracks. It's really amazing. Yeah, even without stopping. Sarala sighed softly. Gretel responded in a low voice, spreading his mental power and carefully sensing the fluctuations in the temple. No, no, still not. In the temple, except for the spiritual power of the priests, the entire wave was lifeless. It was completely different from what he imagined, the feeling of a ray of sunlight shining into the temple and the arrival of the sun god. Ahead, Tia, the Virgin of the Sun, continued to perform sacrifices. Throats were cut, blood was poured into stone basins, and hearts were thrown into braziers. I don't know what was burning in the brazier, but even after throwing so many hearts, they were not crushed. It was just that the smoke kept rising one after another, covering the entire temple with mist. Gradually, Gretel couldn't even see the high priest's face clearly. Only Tia kept moving. Kill the sacrifices one by one and throw away the hearts one by one. Seeing that only the pure white alpaca was still standing in the thick fog, she suddenly stopped killing, raised her head and sang a song. Sun, moon, day, night. The gods hold high their glorious scepter. To guide all things, come here. The voice was exciting, high-pitched, sonorous and beautiful, resounding throughout the temple. As she sang, the smoke in the temple gradually fluctuated, coiling around her like a python. Circling, circling, rising upwards, condensing into a thick white column of smoke between her and the statue. In the corner of the temple, the candles in the hands of the two sun virgins suddenly shined brightly, shining on the smoke pillars and building a rainbow-colored bridge. O Sun God! Our Father God, Virakaka! The founder of the sons of the sun! You open your arms, and the kingdoms of the four directions have arisen. Seeing that the prayer was effective, Tia's singing voice became even louder and she sang a strangely clear prayer song. During the song, she put her left hand on the alpaca's neck and pushed the pure white animal, which was about the same height as her, until it fell to its knees. The stone knife in his right hand swept away and cut the alpaca's throat directly. After the alpaca's blood had drained out, she used her left arm to turn the alpaca over. Instead of rushing to disembowel the alpaca and take out its heart, she raised her head first and stared at the statue. This is the final sacrifice. If this last sacrifice still fails to attract the sun god to descend, then in order to protect the sisters in the maiden court, the only thing she can offer is her own life. Perhaps, before cutting open the alpaca's heart, she should try to maximize the power of the sacrifice. Tia looked up at the statue and gently adjusted her breathing during the breaks in singing. Suddenly, she turned the stone knife upside down and quickly swung it towards her open left wrist. At this moment when the hot blood dripped, Gretel's mind suddenly moved. He felt, a very huge, yet very alienated will, quietly moving. He only moved once, as if he had been disturbed for a moment in his deep sleep. He snorted and continued to sleep. Next, no matter how much the singing went around, no matter how much blood dripped, there was no response anymore. So, the Sun Virgin in front of me is indeed connected to the Sun God. But, the shouting voice is too soft, the Sun God can't wake up. Otherwise, let me poke you. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. During special periods, book reviews will not be displayed for the time being. They will be released in a few days, but they will be visible in the author's background. So don't be stingy with book reviews. Otherwise the author will be sad. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 1157. How to wake up a god? Greet thought quickly. First, he needs to determine the existence state of this god. Is it a concept like the god of nature, god of war, goddess of spring in the old world, or the lord of radiance? Or is it like the birch god, the deer god, the kestrel god, or the eagle god, or the snake god on the back of the new world, which is essentially a monster or spirit, and is an entity in the world? Or, somewhere in between? After all, if it is an entity, its range of influence should not be so far. If it is a concept, it probably will not be seriously injured or killed. Furthermore, Greet also had to think about how to poke the sun god awake. After all, he is God, not a sleeping puppy in front of him. He cannot be poked awake with a stick. However, judging from the fact that Taya killed the sacrifices one by one and sacrificed them with blood and heart, maybe a higher quality sacrifice can attract this god to wake up. It's like setting up a barbecue in front of a sleeping person, grilling the mutton skewers, lamb chops, chicken wings, chicken hearts, and crispy pork belly one by one, sprinkling cumin and 13 incense, and then fanning him hard. Fan, let the scent go straight to his nose. I don't believe you can still sleep. Gretel touched his space bag and saw that there were still 2 monster corpses. However, how to quietly take out the corpses of monsters from the space bag without disturbing others, with the opponent's high priest and a group of monks watching, and send these monsters to Taya so that she can use them as sacrifices? Invisibility. Invisible servant. Avoid detection. Or, Mage's private chamber, a spell that covers an area and prohibits detection 24 hours a day. Gretel thought about it one by one and denied it one by one. Those priests and monks are not stupid. When they see a person suddenly disappear in front of them, and then a new sacrifice appears under Taya, they will not know that it is them who is causing trouble. In fact, allowing them to watch on the sidelines is probably the limit of the other party. If they interfere again, they may be kicked out. He didn't care about being kicked out, but Sirara's temper might explode on the spot. Gretel thought, ruled out, denied. After thinking about it again, ruling it out, denying it again, after thinking for a long time, I still couldn't figure it out, and Taya in front had already leaned down and used her left arm hard. Hey! There was a muffled sound, and the alpaca, which was bleeding out of blood, was turned over with one hand and turned on its back. Taya was not in a hurry to cut her heart and offer sacrifices, but knelt down beside the alpaca. Ignoring that her white cotton robe was stained with blood, she clasped her hands on her chest and raised her head high towards the statue of the god above. The shoulders are spread out, the back is straight, and the slender neck is bent back. The whole person's posture is like a dying swan on a lake with smooth waves like a mirror. She's so pitiful. How can we help her? In the spiritual connection, Cyrilla whispered. As the silver dragon girl spoke, she began to gear up, and her strength fluctuated slightly. It was obvious that the Sun Virgin, who was capable of fighting, and willing to sacrifice her life for her companions and sisters, was very to her liking. If it comes to the last moment, the silver dragon girl may directly use force to snatch Taya out of the Sun Temple. Don't mess around. In the spiritual connection, Luoxia quickly stopped, and the fluctuations in her mental power were slightly tense. Sirara's face fell, and she looked at Gretel longingly, with a somewhat pleading look. Obviously, Cyrilla also knows the importance and knows not to do anything casually, but she can't think of any other way. Gretel gave her a reassuring look. Then, he tried his best to use his brain to discuss with Luoxia. How about we summon an invisible space around us, wrap the sacrifices, and then have invisible servants deliver them? And then let a monster appear next to Taya? Even the fool knows that we helped, right? Luoxia denied it unceremoniously in the psychic connection. Gretel thought for a while and revised his plan. Or, I summon an invisible space around me, cut out the heart of the monster, and then have the invisible servant throw it directly into the brazier. What level of monster is it? Level 3? Level 5? I'm afraid it's not enough, at least it needs to be level 10 or above to make it look this way. But the monsters in Greet's space bag are really not of high quality. They are basically used by him to practice anatomy or as a food reserve. Gretel thought about it again. Or, get some spices, magic crystals, gems, etc., and let the invisible servant quietly throw them in? Are you sure the high priest can't see through your invisible servant? Trouble. Greet frowned and thought, and Cyrilla also joined in, looking at Lucia pleadingly. Or, give Tia a spell to amplify her mental fluctuations, make her prayer more powerful, and be able to directly touch the sun god. I'm not good at magic, Lucia denied it without thinking. Besides, with this girl's current spiritual power, if it were to be amplified enough to touch the sun god, I'm afraid she would bleed from all her orifices immediately. So the brain waves cannot increase infinitely, right? If the increase is too strong, it will either cause cerebral ischemia and lack of oxygen, or excessive adrenaline. Greet thoughtfully. Or, throw a group suggestion or something like that, so that all the monks in the hall can form a powerful energy field and directly reach the sun god. You might as well throw the sacrifice. Lucia complained angrily. You are the high priest and these monks, everyone is dead? These people who pray to the gods every day are blessed with spiritual magic, how can they not feel it? Well. Gretel is confused, Gretel is thinking, and Gretel is considering. In front of the statue, Tia has finished praying. He grabbed the alpaca with his left hand and plucked off the long hair from its belly in twos and twos. He raised the obsidian short knife high with his right hand, and the blade flashed with black light. One knife was used to cut open the abdomen, one knife was used to expand the wound upward, and one knife was used to cut open the diaphragm. He used his hands hard and cracked open the abdominal cavity, exposing the alpaca's heart that had stopped beating. Then, instead of pulling out the heart, he turned the blade and made another cut on his left wrist. Hot blood dripped into the alpaca's belly, and Gretel suddenly felt that the inspiration in the hall was subtly fluctuating. There is a door. This sun god, no matter what his form of existence is, no matter whether he doesn't want to wake up or not, at least he is still connected to this place. Protect me. Gretel hurriedly warned Cyrilla. Then, he lowered his head, closed his eyes, and concentrated. Fall into meditation. Let your spiritual power rise and rise. Rise upward, enter the emerald dream, and interact with the spirituality of this world. Gretel only knows one thing that can attract the attention of the gods 100%, it is the gift of the will of the world that he inspired when he advanced. It is said that when he advanced from level 10 to level 11, even the eagle god and the snake god coveted the gift of the world's will and were eager to snatch it away. When level 11 advanced to level 12, the surroundings were turbulent, and countless monsters rushed to the surrounding area, seeming to want a piece of the pie. Well, it's probably impossible to bite him, but if you can take a breath of air with the will of the world, it's probably good. Now Gretel has no way to advance, and there is no way to immediately trigger the will of the world to come. Of course, without strong enough support around him, he didn't dare to do this rashly, for fear of losing himself. However, there are probably still ways to circumvent the problem. Gretel sank into the emerald dream and immediately unleashed all his mental power. In the emerald dream, there is still endless emerald green all over the mountains and plains. The difference is that this time, there is slight turbulence at the edge of the emerald dream around him. Is the sun a little brighter? Or is there an extremely powerful being that exists in the spiritual world? Gretel didn't know and couldn't find out. He spread out his mental power, and instead of absorbing the power of the emerald dream as usual, he leaped forward and rushed towards the scar on the earth in the center of the forest. To soothe the earth. Go heal the scars. Go and repair the damage caused to the earth by the elves thousands of years ago. The Emerald Dream is called a dream because the power of the mind is extremely powerful here. Greed rushed all the way to the hot and violent place that he did not dare to approach in his previous life, and began to put up defense on himself. High mage armor. The ray is deflected. Cold and heat resistant. Bubble technique. Then call on the power of the earth, add a layer of lead armor to yourself, and then call on the power of the wind, so that you can breathe smoothly. Go ahead. Go forward all the way and come to the edge of the burning mine. Greed concentrated again and called on the power of the earth. Borax. Borax. A lot of borax, a huge amount of borax, a ton, 10 tons, 100 tons of borax. In the Emerald Dream, your dreams are as far as your heart is. The earth cracked, earth and rocks rolled, and white borax appeared out of thin air in response to Gretel's call. Then, pieces of broken lead appeared in the other direction. Greed waved his hand, and a whirlwind rose from the ground, mixing the borax and broken lead together, and rolled it directly into the mine pit. The so-called thought simulation experiment. Since Elder Fahim can simulate microscopy and dialysis in the Emerald Dream, he can simulate whether borax can extinguish the fire of the earth in the Emerald Dream, right? Besides, this is something that Idian and the others have already experimented with. The experiment has been successful. If he does it again in the Emerald Dream, there is no reason why the spirit world cannot respond to him. The earth surged, split and came together, and then split. Then, the eternal flame quietly weakened and gradually disappeared under Greed's gaze. Although what was extinguished was only a small piece of ground, it was also the beginning of the healing of the earth's wounds. Greed breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, something moved in his heart and he raised his head. Transparent, light green raindrops fell in the sky. The raindrops are filled with joy and vitality. Wherever it goes, the fire goes out, the grass sprouts, and the trees sprout branches and leaves. Suddenly, it seemed as if the entire Emerald Dream was ringing in heartfelt cheers. On the edge of the Emerald Dream, the turmoil was a little more intense. The powerful being that exists in the spiritual world seems to be getting closer, lowering his head, salivating. Gretel. Gretel. Greater turmoil is coming in an instant. This time, it is not the turmoil of the spiritual world, but the external, physical turmoil. Cyrilla grabbed Gretel's arm and shook it vigorously, full of surprise. God has descended. God has descended. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. During special periods, book reviews will not be displayed for the time being. They will be released in a few days, but they will be visible in the author's background. So don't be stingy with book reviews. Otherwise the author will be sad. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 1158. God has descended. Has God really descended? He was tinkering with nature and stirring up the world's feedback in the Emerald Dream, but he actually attracted the sun god. I feel that the power fed back is very fragrant even to gods. No, the sleeping sun god opened his eyes and crawled out after smelling the smell. Gretel opened his eyes suddenly. There was a brilliant golden light in front of him, and the pure golden sun's rays poured down from the statue of the god hanging high on the roof. In the thick white mist, a golden beam of light shrouded Tia straightly. Tyndall phenomenon. Gretel thought softly in his heart. The so-called Tyndall phenomenon means that when light passes through a colloid, a bright pathway can be observed in the colloid from the direction of vertical incident light. In other words, when the Tyndall phenomenon occurs, the light itself takes on a shape and becomes visible. The priests of the sun god may or may not know this principle. But it was obvious that all of them regarded this beam of light as a miracle. The second person to the right of the high priest, A middle-aged priest took half a step back, his expression changed dramatically. In the queue, there were 3 or 5 monks with slight panic on their faces. They subconsciously looked at Taya and then at the sacrifices on the ground. Behind the high priest, 2 virgins of the sun holding candles suddenly raised their heads, their faces full of joy. But no one dared to speak out at this moment. Led by the high priest, everyone bowed to the ground. Only Gretel and others were left standing upright. They quickly took a few steps back and leaned against the wall to avoid appearing too conspicuous. From this point of view, it makes sense to light a fire and light smoke in the temple when the sacrifice begins. Without lighting 2 braziers and emitting so much smoke, how could we make the golden light of the sun god show a specific path? Greet silently cursed, feeling a little relieved at the same time. In any case, the golden light on that statue did not appear out of thin air for no reason. Even if she is summoned, it will not be like a stage spotlight that only shines on Tia, the Virgin of the Sun. Even if someone plays tricks and turns on the stage spotlight, he can't get rid of this kind of heavy pressure that makes people a little breathless. The last time I experienced this kind of pressure was when I was climbing the mountain in the dragon's lair of Ophelia, the silver dragon. Therefore, Gretel is very sure. Something very strong, stronger than an adult silver dragon has arrived. It is overlooking, paying attention, declaring its existence. Under the statue of the god, Taya bowed down and prostrated herself on the ground. After bowing, she straightened her upper body and sang a sonorous hymn. The first line was her solo, the second line, the other 2 sun virgins joined in, the third line, headed by the high priest, all the priests, monks, and even warriors present joined in the chorus. Amidst the singing, the light beam slowly expanded outward. A pure golden light beam shone on Taya motionless, and the outer circle scattered bit by bit, shrouding the heads of each clergyman. That way, it was as if the sun god was saying to the people present, "Say it, I'm watching and listening. O sun god. Our father god, Virakaka." After singing the hymn, Tia stood up and raised her arms. She looked up to the sky, staring at the statue of the god that emitted golden light, and said in a loud voice, "Your dignity has been offended. Your sanctity has been profaned. The sun virgins who belong to you are being chased and insulted by others. Some people even want to give them away to outsiders for enjoyment. The idol is automatic without wind." The golden light instantly became thicker and shone on her blood-stained robe, making the sun virgin look like a goddess of war, sacred and majestic, impossible to look at. Opposite her, the high priest coughed and stood up slowly. "Anyone who offends the majesty of the gods will be punished." "Taya, who do you think it is?" "It's Priest Chasko," Tia answered loudly. At the same time, she raised her right arm and pointed forward, the tip of her index finger shining with golden light. The golden beam of light fell on her, and a golden light refracted out, following the direction of her fingertips, and shot towards the middle-aged priest who was kneeling on the right side of the high priest, whose expression had changed drastically before. I didn't," replied Chasko hoarsely. The voice was very loud, so loud that it even surpassed Taya and the high priest. Everyone could hear the dryness in the voice. Taya did not refute, but raised her arms and continued to raise them high towards the statue. "O sun god! Great father god! Your brilliance shines on all things, and nothing in the world can be hidden from your eyes. I open my heart to you, and all the secrets, all the timidities and hesitations are all presented in front of you. This is devotion to God and a challenge to man. As a virgin of the sun, I dare to let go of my heart and let the gods I believe in inspect. As a priest of the sun god, do you dare? You just dare to do such a thing secretly because the gods have been sleeping for a long time and don't have the energy to keep an eye on everyone. Do you dare to expose your dirty mind and the shameful things you have done to the eyes of the gods? This guy is dead, Luoxia commented quietly in the spiritual connection. Cyrilla's silver blue eyes also curled up, she smiled sweetly, and raised her thumbs up to Gretel. Here you go. A few of them were rustling around and making small moves quietly. In front of the statue, the high priest had a livid face and stared at the middle-aged priest named Chaska. Chaska. Did you do it? Tell the truth. I didn't. Chaska replied tremblingly. Before he finished speaking, there was a sudden scream. Golden flames burned on his body. From the ends of the hair, to the top of the head, to the skin, every inch is burning. The flames not only adhered to the outside of his body, but also continued to spurt out from his 5 senses and 7 orifices. At a glance, it almost burned him into a golden torch. To the left and right, 2 priests knelt on the ground, almost rolling away. However, the golden flame did not touch them. It stared at Chaska and burned him alone, as if it had eyes. Even if some flames splashed and fell on the surrounding curtains, and the robes of the priests, they did not cause any harm. It's too awful. Greet took a breath and whispered in the psychic connection. Logosya disagreed. Deserve it? For clergy, every ounce of power comes from God, and the power given by God flows through the body every moment. These powers are good when they are good, but once they are withdrawn by God, or used directly for punishment. Fortunately, I'm a magician. Gretel shuddered. The magician's power comes from himself and the world, and no one can take it back with the snap of a finger. Those clergymen don't think it's convenient to advance. The priests of the natural God Church are only good at this. Their power actually comes from nature. When things have come to this point, there is no need to say more about who is right and who is wrong. In fact, if the high priest does not want to lose his divine favor, what he needs to consider is how to deal with Chaska's subordinates and how to uproot those involved. Taya held her head high in victory, staring at Chaska, screaming, rolling, curling up, and begging on the ground. The 2 sun virgins held candlesticks in their hands and looked at her with admiration, their little faces shining. As for the other priests and monks, no one dared to stand up, whether they were innocent or some were not so innocent. Everyone was kneeling on the ground, but the voices of praying and singing became louder and louder. Gretel breathed a sigh of relief. To be honest, in a world with a true God, it is really not a good idea to violate God's laws. Why are you afraid that God cannot see you? Even if God's processor is temporarily down and cannot handle so many requests, and someone really pokes him, he will punish those who blaspheme him for his own benefit. And he still wants to humiliate the Sun Virgin. The Sun Virgin, in theory, seems to be the concubine of the Sun God. What do you think about cuckolding the Sun God? If you really summon a God, if you don't want to burn your whole body, you should at least burn the thing that caused you trouble. Great job, Tia. Golden flames crackled and burned. Chaska rolled from east to west, and from west to east, her shouts getting hoarse and her voice getting weaker. Greet listened and watched boredly, and began to lose focus. How hot is this flame? Where did it start burning? To be able to scream for so long, it feels like the airway is not carbonized, otherwise, the flames will burst out from the lungs, and the vocal cords will be carbonized first, and there will be no sound at all. The epidermis does not seem to be severely carbonized, and there are no deep 2nd-degree burns, 3rd-degree burns, or anything like that. Could this path of divine power burning follow the legendary meridians? I don't know if I can find a way to dissect the body after this person is burned to death. Task, I'm afraid it won't be possible to bury it normally. If I just drag it out and feed the dogs in the mass grave, I can still manage to steal it. His eyes were straight and his mind was wandering. As he was thinking about it, a golden light suddenly flashed across his eyes, illuminating his eyes with a vast whiteness. In an instant, tears flowed down my face and I couldn't see anything anymore. Ouch! Gretel raised his hands to cover his face and leaned back. Fortunately, he was leaning against the wall so he wouldn't fall. He covered his face, lowered his head, and threw 2 or 3 healing spells on himself. He finally recovered and slowly opened his eyes. So bright? So bright? What kind of light is this? When I looked through my fingers, it made me unable to open my eyes. Is it the sun god? Even if you are the sun god, if you have something to say, what do you mean by coming up and shining a light on my face? Maybe he cursed too hard, or maybe the sun god who came here really has the ability to read people's hearts. The dazzling golden light slowly converged and turned into a pure golden, yet soft light pillar, falling gently on him. And deep in Gretel's heart, a majestic, grand, and deeply reverberating voice also sounded. Outsider, where did your power come from? Can you talk about it? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. During special periods, book reviews will not be displayed for the time being. They will be released in a few days, but they will be visible in the author's background. So don't be stingy with book reviews. Otherwise the author will be sad. Suddenly I discovered that I missed 2 thanks in the previous update, so now it is update 2 with 10,000 rewards. There will be one more update tomorrow, and this round of updates will be over. You can go back to your happy life of 2 chapters a day and 2,000 words per chapter. Spread your hands and feet to spread the floor, so tired. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 1159. Greet slowly lowered his palm. Phew, fortunately the sun god can communicate and adjust his status. Otherwise, such strong sunlight would hit us directly. This is stronger than the high beam headlights coming from the opposite direction without any warning when driving on the road. Fortunately, he was standing still. If he were moving at high speed, the car would have overturned. Fortunately, now that the sun god has dimmed the lights, Gretel is willing to talk to him. He calmed down, adjusted his breath, conveyed a thought of goodwill and tribute, and then said in his heart, "Dear sun god, I am willing to talk to you. But there are too many people here and the environment is too noisy. Otherwise, you can finish your business first, and then we move to a quiet place and clear the air. Talk quietly." There seemed to be a little smile in the spiritual communication. Then, the golden light in front of Gretel silently converged, and the light beam gathered and fell on the body of Taya, the Virgin of the Sun, from the crown, to the hair, to the robe on the body. One by one, it penetrates inwards. Taya stood upright under the statue, her body trembling slightly, but her back was as straight as a spear. Her long brown-black hair changes color inch by inch, starting from the root and moving downwards. In the hall, the sound of gentle breathing could be heard one after another. The high priest only glanced at it and buried his head deeply to show respect to the god. The surrounding monks even knelt on the ground, pressing their foreheads tightly to the ground, not daring to lift them up at all. The eyes of the 2 sun virgins holding lamps were illuminated golden by the brilliant golden light. There was a hushed murmur in the temple. Gretel pricked up his ears and secretly cast a spell to enhance his hearing, and heard them saying, "Sun goddess, sun goddess, sun goddess." Greet's eyes curled up. Is this an upgrade? Well, look carefully. Taya's straight long hair has completely turned into brilliant pure gold from top to bottom. As if feeling his gaze, the Sun Virgin turned around, nodded and smiled at him. His eyes were bright and his eyes were as bright as gold. It seems to have really been upgraded. With such an obvious divine favor in her body, probably no one in this temple will be able to bully her anymore, and she will even be able to protect the other Sun Virgins in the temple. This result is pretty good. Just don't, because the hair of the Sun Goddess is golden, or in other words, the hair and eyes of the sun god's favored ones are golden, so let the people of this country regard those people from the old continent as the favored ones of the gods. If you see those blonde and blue-eyed guys when the sun god cannot send down the oracle, you will think that there is a large group of God's favored ones, and they will listen to whatever they say. These natives will suffer a big loss. That's right. That's right. Those outsiders are the most cunning. The golden light suddenly fluctuated, almost as if it was boiling. And in Greet's mind, an extremely angry voice also came from. That's what they did. Those blonde-haired, white-skinned outsiders, they sent people to sneak attack me, entangle me, beat me, and kill me. Taking advantage of my weakness, they sent people to invade my country and capture me. Kill my chosen king. Tisk tisk, this is really a big loss. Gretel shook off his sweat, sent a ray of sympathy to the other side, and asked seriously. Dear sun god, I see your justice and kindness. We also come with kindness. May I ask, is there anything I can do to help you? I'm hurt, I need strength, I need the kind of power you summoned. Tisk, you knew it was indeed the case. Greet sighed softly. This kind of power was fed back to me by the Emerald Dream. It was fed back to me by nature and the spiritual world. I don't know how to pass it on to you, and I don't know how to let you find that kind of power yourself. The white fog in the hall suddenly rolled up. The white mist rolled with golden light, opened, closed, and opened. At first glance, it seemed as if it was about to swallow Greet in one mouthful. Give it to me. Give it to me. You can have anything you want. Gold, gems, land, slaves, you can have anything you want, but please give me that power. Sarala and Luosia raised their eyebrows and took a step inward to block Greet. Gretel sighed. Calm down. Not only did he groan in his mind, he also stretched out his arms, spread his palms flat, and pressed down. One after another, it was as if he was trying to push the excited sun god from jumping all over the floor to sitting down. It's useless for you to argue with me, right? Even if you swallow me in one gulp, the strength in me won't be enough for you, right? Calm down, be quiet, and let's discuss it. The person on the other side is getting more and more excited, but the voice is getting more and more ethereal. It was intermittent, as if the power was unstable and about to be disconnected. The golden light rolled a few times, then suddenly shrank back, covering the high priest. Even dozens of steps away, Gretel heard the high priest let out a sigh of relief. Oh, the sun god is still willing to deal with him and use him. This means that although he has caused a lot of trouble, God's favor for him is still there and his position is still stable. He won't be unemployed or kicked out of the temple. Gretel silently thought about the high priest's mental activities. Then, he saw the high priest smile and step forward quickly. Dear outsiders, respected guests favored by my God, the high priest crossed his hands, pressed his shoulder on the other side, and bowed deeply to be disrespectful. The great sun god has sent down an oracle, hoping to have a detailed discussion with you. Of course, it is not here, our remote place is not worthy of my God's long visit. My God hopes that you can go to the king capital, go to the great temple in the royal capital. Well, this is the great temple in the royal capital. Is it closer to the kingdom of God, or closer to the true form of the sun god? Does it mean that it is more convenient for the gods to descend, or that it is more convenient to convey the oracle to the high priest and talk to him through the high priest? Gretel thought about the loss of power transmitted by the eagle god and the snake god over long distances, and thought about the divine descendancy of the holy sea of glory, which could not even fire a few shots from a distance, so he felt that he could understand it. But, of course, understanding does not mean that you have to act accordingly. We are not just idle and traveling in your country. In fact, my companions and I have important things to do. After we are done, we will return to the big forest immediately, so we have no time to take our time. Whatever your distinguished guests have to do, you can leave it to us, the high priest immediately said. My gods will, as long as your distinguished guest is willing to go to the royal capital, we can meet all your normal needs. Oh, it's a normal demand, not something that the lion can ask for and can agree to any demand. For example, if you give 100 tons of gold or something, if you exchange it with enough power to restore the sun god, then the other party will probably be willing to exchange it. However, if you just go to the royal capital, then maybe giving a kilogram of gold or something like that is enough. So, what about borax? Can you ask them to give you 1,000 tons of borax? Or 2,000 tons? 5,000 tons? 10,000 tons? If there is no spot, insufficient manpower, and cannot be mined, can we ask them to agree to open the mine and allow the elves to summon the earth element to mine it on their own? Can I send it outside the elf secret realm? If not, how about sending it to the bottom of the mountain range and letting the natives in the rainforest come out to pick it up? A bunch of conditions flew through Gretel's mind. Then he sadly discovered. He is not good at negotiating terms and bargaining. He is really not good at fighting with others, going back and forth, struggling point by point, and negotiating the most favorable conditions for oneself. In the past, if he had anything to discuss, he would leave it to professionals. Oh, among our group, there are still people outside. Gretel raised a smile. When he comes back, we will gather together and discuss it before we can give you an answer on whether to go to the royal capital and when. No problem. Please rest in the guest house, your friends, we will find them immediately. The high priest beat the snake and put it on the stick. You can't let Gretel go, it's absolutely impossible to let him go, and if you let him go, you'll probably have nowhere to look for him. Luxurious guest rooms are arranged, delicious food and drinks are served, and smart servants serve you. Then, he gathered all his friends and sent them to the royal capital together respectfully. After getting into trouble, the sun god was willing to give him another job. If this goes wrong again, he, the high priest, can cut off his head and dig out his heart as a sacrifice to the gods. Greet did everything he could and was arranged to stay temporarily in a tall guest house on the left side of the temple. Monks and warriors were everywhere in the temple, and before nightfall, they found Udian. Udian found the market with familiarity. Relying on his extraordinary ability and the skillful use of charming humans, he quickly found the small noble who owned the Ueming sand mine. After a round of verbal exchanges, the two sides drank 2 large pots of water, chewed up 7 or 8 mint leaves floating in the water, and finally negotiated a purchase price for a large amount of ore. 100 kilograms of Ueming sand can be exchanged for 1 kilogram of silver. Purchase at least 1,000 kilograms at a time, no bargaining. Mining it yourself? This is okay, but someone needs to stand by and supervise. No matter how much Ueming sand is mined, no matter how much the guests spend on mining, it cannot be less than the price sold in the market. Udian only cared about quantity and efficiency, not the price. He agreed to this condition without any care and made an appointment to go to the mine with him for on-site inspection. Before setting off, a group of monks blocked the door. What? Going to the royal capital? I don't have time. Udian's instinctive reaction was this. The monk who came to block him was smiling and did not explain, but respectfully invited him to the temple. Just after meeting Gretel and others, the high priest came to the door. The distinguished guest wants Ueming sand, right? How much does it cost? As long as the distinguished guest is willing to go to the royal capital, and the weight is less than 5,000 kilograms, our temple can give it all as a gift. If it is not enough, we can give it to the temples along the way, and even the royal capital we can raise money for you in the grand temple. Udian? I worked so hard to negotiate this deal, what are you doing? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of During special periods, book reviews will not be displayed for the time being. They will be released in a few days, but they will be visible in the author's background. So don't be stingy with book reviews. Otherwise the author will be sad. Thanks to @Mingjinkinglian and @Yashanzenjian for the 100 starting coins. Pia new book, I popularize science about Chinese gods in another world. This is the story of a Chinese god who turned the world upside down. The protagonist Qin Ping, with the Chinese god system, travels to a different world where the Chinese gods have not awakened. Then the end of the outer gods came. Who is it? Saying that I am godless in China. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Jialan 2020. Chapter 1160. Idian was at a loss. Idian was confused. Idian doubts life. However, as the leader of the team, a half-legendary elf warrior, and the organizer of the strip, Idian had to shoulder the responsibility and negotiate with the other party. Comparatively speaking, the boy who provoked the sun god was comfortably drinking milk tea made from alpaca milk, eating soft and rich egg yolks, and was still picking and choosing with Cyrilla, trying to find the best one. Matching her alpaca shawl. Damn it! Really, damn it! The key is that Greet's negotiation efficiency is even higher than him. He negotiates with ore prospectors one by one. From Greet's side, everything he needs is given by others with both hands. Idian grinned at his teeth, but still faced Cyrilla's accusing gaze, and carried Gretel over. Squatting in the corner, I got to know him first. Hey, are you sure? No, Gretel confidently spread his hands. I don't know how the feedback received in the Emerald Dream is transferred to reality. Then, I don't know how to let the Sun God enter the Emerald Dream to help with work and earn feedback from the world. Idian sulked. Should you use an empty bait to fish, or should you catch such a big fish? Other fish, such as sharks or tuna, can only toss back and forth on the sea for 3 or 2 days at most. Such a huge fish will jump up from the sea and directly press onto the boat, taking it with it. The boat was pushed into the bottom of the sea together. Then you still dare to promise him? I didn't promise him. Gretel continued to spread his hands. Seeing Idian sweating on his forehead, his eyes on fire, and the smell of sulfur coming out of his mouth when he opened his mouth, he quickly continued. I think about it, repair the world, and do things that are beneficial to the world. The world will give feedback, or give rewards. You see, when I extinguish the flame in the Emerald Dream, spirituality can give me feedback. In reality, woolen cloth. It certainly works in reality. Idian thought silently. If in reality, we couldn't get feedback when guarding the secret realm of elves, extinguishing the flames, and repairing the forest, there wouldn't be generations of forest guards guarding here and making silent contributions. There would not be generations of elves coming out of Evermeet Island, working hard to find a way to appease nature. Even in the Emerald Dream, repairing the Earth's wounds will not be treated as a difficult problem for everyone. If you complete this puzzle or even just a little bit, there will be a reward. Look, Idian, there are rewards for those who come up with ideas, and there will definitely be rewards for those who actually do it. Greet continued quickly. 100,000 tons of borax. 100,000 tons. This thing has to be transported into the secret realm of the elves, poured into the ore veins, and extinguished the flames that have been burning for thousands of years. What a huge project. So you. Idian only said a few words and then quickly stopped. He pursed his lips, glanced sideways, and glanced at the great temple not far away. The curtains under the eaves were fluttering, and on the curtains, the golden statue of the sun god looked down at him, as if smiling at him. That's what you had in mind. You actually dare to set your sights on God and get a god to do the hard work for everyone. Greet, you are getting more and more courageous. There's nothing I can do. Gretel sighed. He looked at Idian, at Lucia, and then turned to look at the far away direction of the rainforest where they had come. How many manpower can the elves have? How many masters above level 15 can enter the secret realm to work? How many people can afford to die doing such dangerous work in such a dangerous place? His tone was concerned and sincere, and Idian felt warm in his heart. Especially hearing that Gretel is concerned about the safety of the elves. Hey, although this little cub is only half-elf blood and has never mentioned going to Evermeet Island, he is still very concerned about the elves. Not bad, not bad, it seems that he knows how to treat him well and remembers it. If he slowly raises him for 10 or 8 years, he won't be afraid that he will not regard the elf as one of his own. After all, he is just a kid in his 20s. A cub. Because of this, when Iudian spoke again, his eyes and voice softened involuntarily. He leaned forward, placed his left hand on his knees, and opened his right arm slightly forward, as if he was ready to protect him at any time. Then, what are you going to do if that person doesn't believe in this method and may receive gifts from the world? If you don't believe it, don't believe it. I didn't intend to let him believe it from the beginning, Gretel said confidently. In other words, with such a buffer, he has already thought of a way. The first batch of Ueming sand and lead must be transported in by you. You poured it into the veins. Transport, 100 tons. You can probably see the effect. Let him try to follow up and take a look. It is a natural gift to you, and he will decide whether to work or not. Then, what if he still refuses? Then let's do experiments here. Do experiments, do research, write papers, advance to a higher level, and the will of the world will always fall. Gretel said that advancing is as simple as eating and drinking water. How much he can get at that time depends on his own ability. Anyway, the will of the world was directly instilled in me, so I don't believe he can stop it halfway. Idian rolled his eyes subconsciously. He looked left and right, and hooked Luoxia. Luoxia came over holding half a yolk fruit and asked angrily. Give me a barrier, Idian asked confidently, and with a flattering smile. Luoxia nodded and waved casually. A soft white mist rose around them, shrouding several people in it. For a moment, the sounds of wind, voices, and movement outside all disappeared. The mage's private chamber can prevent probing, eavesdropping, prophecies, and the detection of thoughts. But it may not prevent direct detection by the gods. After she finished speaking seriously, she turned around and left. Idian pouted at her back. He wanted to complain but held it back. He leaned towards Gretel and lowered his voice. Let me tell you a secret, don't tell it. The elder has written to Yangju Island about the success of our experiment. This time, at least 2 legends will come and go in with us for the experiment. If it succeeds again, there are many more legends to come. Gretel opened her mouth slightly. 2 legends, Elder Japhahim is 3. If successful, there will be more to come. How many legends are there in the elves? All the legends of the Magic Council, added together, seem to be 18. What is the population of the elves? Can it support so many legends? So, are elves really the darlings of magic? You said, with 3 or 5 legends here, can even gods be able to fight against them? He also lowered his voice. Idian shrugged. I'm afraid the true god can't do it. But, like, this. He glanced out the window, the ends of his eyes flicked upward, and his eyes circled around the statue. With 3 or 5 legends here, I'm really not afraid of him. So, our goal is try to buy time. After reaching a consensus and feeling confident, Idian walked out of the barrier and concentrated on negotiating with the high priest. In other words, writing negotiation is read as making conditions. The amount of moonlight sand we need is huge. No problem, as long as it is my God's will, we can give you whatever you want. To show our sincerity, the 5,000 kilograms stored in the temple can be handed over to you first. We also need at least the same amount of lead as the moonlight sand. It's no problem. We can deliver the lead stored in the temple and the nearby market today. But again, no matter how much you want, the distinguished guests must arrive in the royal capital and the great temple can convey the will of our God. Okay, give me a map and let's walk there slowly. Anyway, I have to take Gretel around to gain more knowledge, so let's go to the royal capital for a walk. No. We provide guides, we provide servants, we provide mounts, and we provide all expenses on the road. The high priest immediately made a lot of conditions without thinking. Please be sure to accept our guidance. Dear guests, although you may seem to be noble people at first glance, having the temple help guide you can save you a lot of trouble. This isn't necessary, Idion shrugged. Without waiting for the high priest to retort, he turned back and pointed at his group. I, a high-level warrior, can fly. Loxia, a high-level spellcaster, can fly. Gretel and Cyrilla, both of them can fly. Fly all the way over, slowly than your servants and mounts. It's much faster to walk over. But then you won't know where you went. Maybe while walking, I suddenly changed my mind and slipped away. It doesn't matter if you leave, if the sun god pursues me, I will be dead. The high priest Khan is about to come down. He quickly replenished the pot. The sky is the territory of the condor. It is the territory of the condor that carries the sun god on its back and travels through the night. Dear guest, please let our guide follow you, otherwise, there will be a lot of unnecessary trouble. Idion bargained here, and successfully made the high priest promise to provide guidance and supplies along the way. He ensured that there would be Warcraft meat, fresh vegetables and fruits every day, and that everyone, especially the beautiful lady, would be fed. In the rainforest, Archmage Baebo said goodbye to Elder Fahim, drove the airship, and flew westward. Passing through the clouds and fog, passing through the treetops, after flying for several days, I finally saw the majestic and towering mountains. Is Little Greet traveling here? Where can I find someone in such a big mountain range? Tisk. Archmage Baebo muttered and took out a magic compass. Little Gretel is not easy to find, but the lightning cat given by the teacher has very obvious characteristics. I hope Little Grey puts the lightning cat in the space equipment. If it is placed outside, the magic compass will be more convenient for positioning. Ling Yuchen has been rewarded with more rewards. Congratulations to Ling Ye for being single. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. I've finished the last update, and I'll be able to write only 4,000 words tomorrow. I'm so happy, spread out my limbs. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 1161. Archmage Baebo controlled the airship and climbed along the rising mountains. From the flat and vast forest, leaped to the towering mountain ridge, and then crossed the snow line. Finding a slightly flatter hilltop to park the airship, Archmage Baebo looked down and sighed deeply. Well, in this place, just standing here and blowing the mountain breeze can feel the strong magic fluctuations. The power contained when the mountains rise, the flames surging at the mountain passes, the magic crystals hidden deep in the earth, and the strong wind that blows through the passes and carries the clouds and mist. With such a glance, he had already seen at least 7 or 8 hills, which were suitable for building a magician tower for magicians to meditate and practice inside. If this place could belong to the parliament, or at least allow the parliament to establish a stronghold. Of course, just having plenty of energy is not enough. Looking down from the top of the mountain, the land here is extremely barren. As you can imagine, not many crops can grow. There are not many crops to support the population. Even if the magician wants to find apprentices, Even if he wants to find some servants to help him with his daily life, he doesn't know where to look. Moreover, the distance is too long, transportation is inconvenient, and even communication is inconvenient. With the development of the parliament to the present, exchanges, discussions, various meetings, and various papers among magicians have greatly promoted the development of magic. Building a mage tower here and sending magicians here, unless communication and transportation methods can be greatly developed, is nothing more than establishing a few resource points. The mages sent here are almost like exiles. I don't know what little Greet will do in this place. If this little guy wants to help local residents, he might start with planting or medical care, right? He slowly adjusted the compass, turning it around. Soon, the compass needle pointed firmly to the north, pointing to the direction of the towering mountains extending under the snow-capped peaks. Archmage Baebo looked up and took a deep breath. According to the map Elder Fahim gave him, that direction should, maybe, with a high probability, be the direction of the royal capital of this indigenous kingdom. At the same time, it is also the direction where the great temple is located. In other words, in this kingdom of gods, it is the place where the gods reside. Although the majesty of the gods is theoretically far-reaching and can envelope the entire kingdom, in reality, these words are just heard. Only like the Lord of Glory in the holy city of glory, like the god of war in the great temple in the highlands, or like the goddess of spring near the royal family's ancestral land, or the Holy Land, can they exert their greatest power. Little Greet, didn't you run there? Wherever there is excitement, go wherever it is, or in other words, wherever you can get the most out of it, go wherever you can. Archmage Baebo turned around and returned to the airship, sat down safely, and pushed the joystick of the console. The airship, which was petite and could only carry 3 or 5 people, roared, and several light sails popped out from the top, slowly rising into the sky. Along the mountains, along the vague roads on the mountains, flying towards the north. Elder Fahim said that the most obvious symbol of the royal capital is a huge lake embedded in the plateau. That's where they worship the sun god once a year, and it's also where the divine power is strongest. It will be much easier to find the lake, then circle around the lake to find the royal capital. Gretel didn't know that the senior brother had followed his teacher's order and came to deliver something to him. He chased him all the way from Nevis to the center of the rainforest, and then to the north. Maybe they will even chase him too far and catch up in front of him. At this moment, he was standing on a towering ridge at the door of a rock battle fortress, and he let out a heartfelt sigh. Wow! On this plateau, in this continuous mountain range, there is actually a road. There is a relatively smooth road made of deliberately cut stones. In some key areas, you can still see the shielding stone walls next to it, and you can see the castle built with rocks at the pass. It winds like a giant dragon in the mountains, extending forward like a brilliant silver line. Although it is not very wide, the widest place can only accommodate 2 horses running side by side. That is also a road. You can push the cart now. The cart was pulled with animal power. Can carry a lot of cargo. A larger army can be made to move quickly. How on earth could such a road be built on such a towering ridge, on such a plateau where it is difficult to breathe and the altitude may exceed 3,000 meters? This road, how long is this road? He asked subconsciously. Next to him, a young priest sent by the Sun Temple to guide him proudly puffed up his chest. This road is centered on the royal capital and goes east, south, west, and north, running through all directions. It crosses mountains and canyons, embraces coasts and plains, and is thousands of miles away in every direction. Gretel, rightward arrow. Rightward arrow. Every direction? Are you kidding me? The jurisdiction of this indigenous kingdom only includes mountains and a little bit of flat land near the sea, and it has no control over the rainforest. It doesn't matter if it can be thousands of miles away to the south or north. It can be thousands of miles to the east or west, but maybe it has to stretch all the way to the bottom of the sea? However, even if there are only two directions, north and south, each thousands of miles away, the scale of this project is still very impressive. The Great Wall is thousands of miles long. Will this ancient road be longer than the Great Wall? Perhaps his suspicious eyes stung the other party. The young priest stepped forward and waved his arms, so as to tell him the greatness of this ancient road. Before he could speak, a middle-aged priest behind him sighed deeply. It's a pity that more than half of this road no longer belongs to us. Our royal capital, the fertile land to the north of the royal capital, and those glorious cities have all fallen into the hands of rude and despicable outsiders. Our royal family and our temples were forced to move south and hide in places where outsiders could not reach. This is really miserable. Gretel sighed sympathetically. However, compared to the things that cannot be seen on the map, the kingdom's area has shrunk by half, and the highways it can control have shrunk by half. He is more concerned about. There are ready-made roads. Those guys from the glorious Holy See won't fight along the roads, right? Governor Martinez, the distant capital of the Viceroyalty of Pelu, is also asking this question. In front of him, Chief of Staff Barvik was shaking his head like a rattle. Your Majesty the Governor, the conditions of the roads here are very bad. Not only are they narrow, but they are also high and low, and full of potholes. Alpacas can walk across it smoothly, but it is difficult for horses to walk on it. As for cars, they can directly break the wheels. Moreover, some of the roads on the edge of the occupied area have not been repaired for decades or hundreds of years. Before considering the supply convoy, our first consideration is not to get lost in the mountains. Dear Governor, you must leave enough margin when marching. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to Ed for the 500 starting coins. The Inca Trail passes through 6 South American countries, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, with a total length of approximately 30,000 kilometers, of which 7,000 kilometers include historic sites. This ancient road was a mountain road built along the Andes between 1438 and 1532 by the Inca Empire. It was a transportation artery for the rulers at that time to convey government orders and for the Incas to produce, live, and trade. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 1162. Archmage Baebo's airship flew quickly along the ridge. The rulers of the glorious Holy See were still repeatedly calculating the number of people to be mobilized and the marching route. Route length. Width. Water source around. How many mountains need to be climbed, how many bridges need to be built, where the mountain roads have collapsed and need to be repaired, how many indigenous people need to be mobilized, how much food is needed in total. Greet, on the other hand, knew nothing about these things and walked happily along the mountain road. High reaction? You can collect oxygen into the bubble technique at any time and take a few more beautiful breaths. Can't climb the mountain? Riding the phantom horse does not consume much physical energy. If you are really tired, you can go to sleep on the floating saucer and tie the floating saucer around the phantom horse's neck. Supply issues? Just kidding, with the space bag in hand, no one can be wronged, but the caster can't be wronged. With such a strong foundation of hard conditions, the journey becomes very enjoyable. Drink tea, chat, and look at the scenery. Look at the snow-capped mountains in the distance and the canyons up close. The majestic places are dizzying. The only drawback is. Greet, you're so tanned, Cyrilla pouted and muttered. The sun is so harsh today, I feel like my face is going to peel off. Gretel. His first reaction was to take a quick look at the nearby sun god priests. Fortunately, none of the priests around him responded, probably because of the language barrier. Moreover, these sun god priests do not have language proficiency all the time like the mages. Otherwise, if you complain in front of them that the sun is too harsh, God knows if they will want to beat you. However, miss, at an altitude of more than 3,000 meters, there will be a high reflection plateau, and it is true that ultraviolet rays are strong. But you are a dragon. Dragon. You look like an elf on the outside, but in your essence, you are still a silver dragon. Silver dragons that live in high mountains, snowy mountains, and dragon nests in the clouds all year round, do you really think that their skin will peel due to such a degree of sun? Of course, Sarah complained, and that had to be resolved anyway. Gretel touched the space bag, took out a piece of silver iodide film, and activated the sun protection magic. Go. A thin, vague black mist rose from the palm of her hand, covering her head and face, covering Cyrilla's body like a gauze. The silver dragon girl's eyes lit up, she gave him a thumbs up, and raised her chin. What about yourself? What about yourself? Don't let your skin peel off, get red, or get tanned. Ah. Feelings are like Xiangzhuang's sword dance, intended for Pei Gong. Gretel quickly smiled at her, cast a sunscreen spell on himself, and threw another one to Lucia. When it was Idian's turn, this half-step legend calmly waved his hand. I don't need it. This little sunshine is nothing to me. That is, you are a person who can physically enter a high radiation area and kill 7 in and 7 out, and you can carry radioactive dust in your lungs for hundreds of years. The ultraviolet rays in high altitude areas cannot harm your epidermal cells at all. Bar. Gretel silently cursed, and when he turned his eyes, he saw a group of sun god monks looking at him intently, with strange eyes. Look at him, and then look at the light black mist covering his whole body. That look in his eyes is like seeing a devil. Okay. Gretel could almost imagine what they were thinking. Where are the guests of the sun god that we agreed upon? It was agreed that the sun god would personally issue the oracle, but where are the distinguished guests coming to the royal capital? This spell seems to be against the sun god. Of course, as long as Gretel doesn't criticize him face to face, Gretel can pretend he didn't see it. He was shameless and continued to chat and laugh with Cyrilla, and continued to wander on the mountain road. The phantom horse landed silently, the silver moon deer walked briskly, and although the alpaca ridden by the locals was short, it walked the smoothest on the mountain road. Uphill, downhill, around the mountains, through the fortress. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Finally one day, the stretching mountains turned into towering city walls, built with thick and huge stones. Gretel raised his head and silently estimated in his mind. 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors. Although it was not as good as the Nanjing city wall he had seen, it was already remarkable that such a majestic city wall could be built on such a steep mountain. The monks from the Sun Temple came forward to negotiate with the defenders, and then led them into the deep city gate. Greet took the opportunity to touch it and found that the cutting of the stone was extremely fine. The gaps between the stones could not be penetrated with the thinnest knife. Moreover, it is completely built without mortar or any other adhesive. In this country where only bronze tools are available and stone tools are still used in remote areas, it is really amazing that such a huge city wall can be built. They passed through the city gate and walked through the streets of the city. The street, which is not very wide, is divided into 2 sides by a canal, in which a clear stream flows. Gretel curiously jumped off the phantom pony and reached out to grab a handful of water from the stream. Wow! It's so cold! He shook his hands desperately, wiped them dry, and put them into his arms shivering. Next to him, the priest of the sun god raised his head proudly and pointed to the distant mountain peak. This is the melted snow from the sacred mountains. It collects in it and flows into our cities for the children of the sun god to enjoy. Gretel really wanted to throw a detection magic or an identification spell into the snow water to see what sacred substance was in the snow water. A commotion suddenly sounded. People hurriedly quickened their pace, pouring out from various houses and rushing towards the front. Greet and others were carried by the crowd and rushed to a square. Before Greet could figure out what was happening, a low, powerful, and long chirping sound began. "It's the Holy Conch. The king is traveling." The middle-aged priest next to Gretel whispered softly. He gestured and winked, telling Greet and others to quickly dismount and stick to the roadside. At the edge of the square, people had knelt down one after another, like wheat straw blown down by the wind. Greet had no interest in kneeling. As for Cyrilla and others, there is no need to expect them to kneel down for mortals. The middle-aged priest looked around nervously, then quickly led them into a shop along the street, closed the door and lowered the curtains. There was a sound of brushing, and Gretel and others quickly crowded to the window. Lucia raised her hand and released the mage's secret cabin, making the room look dark from the outside. Looking from the inside out, the view is transparent and completely unobstructed. In the square, half of the square was filled with priests and nobles wearing colorful robes. A priest led 6 pure white alpacas and walked towards the highest priest. Behind the alpaca, a group of slaves with strong bodies and numb faces were led forward. In front of the brazier in the center of the square, a blood tank familiar to Gretel and others had been set up. The priests held intricately decorated bronze knives and treated each other in silence. "Gretel. Sun god, can you come out and talk? We don't want blood sacrifices. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Don't forget the book review. Although it is not published, the author can still see it and it can give the author a lot of encouragement. Thanks to Luo Shui Yishang for the 3,000 starting coin reward. You win. You have filled up the slot for more updates. We'll continue to add more updates tomorrow. Recommend a new book, The Doomsday of Difference Point by the author of The Doomsday Puzzle. Infinite flow, the infinite world and the real world blend into each other, Thulhu style. The forerunners of the infinite world are constantly resisting the corruption of the real world. It should have a very heavy and solemn atmosphere, but it is also made very funny by the author's imagination. Should I say that the master's move is indeed extraordinary? It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 1163. The ceremony in the square went on in an orderly manner. Gretel and others on the side of the square poked their heads through the window. Wow, there are so many gold and silver statues in the square. At first glance, Cyrilla was attracted by the flash of gold and silver. Greet looked intently in the direction of her finger and saw that the square where the nobles and priests stood was covered with fine white sand. In the middle of the white sand, there are various sculptures, large and small, shining with gold and silver. Alpaca, llama, fox, guinea pig, turkey, conch. Although the smallest one was only the size of a knuckle, and the largest one was not as big as a palm, so many gold and silver sculptures were thrown in the middle of the white sand like pebbles on the beach. This level of luxury still made Gretel twitch slightly. Take a breath. These are all cast by the craftsmen of the royal capital. At some point, the priest of the sun god, who was responsible for accompanying them, had already come to greet. He pointed at the sculptures on the beach and sighed softly. Alas, the relocation of the royal capital here has really caused heavy losses. In the past, the statues on the beach were at least twice as big as they are now. Half of them were made of gold, and they were much larger than they are now. Greet also wanted to sigh. This kind of behavior of throwing gold and silver sculptures on the beach, in his opinion, is a complete disregard of wealth and people's power, and yet, the other party is still lamenting that he is much poorer now than before. Ah, by the way, why is there a beach in this square? He suddenly realized. I remember this place should be on a plateau. Even if there are rocks and weathered gravel, it shouldn't be like this, right? These sands were brought back from the coast, symbolizing the connection between the sacred mountain peaks and the mother of the ocean. Mamakocha, the middle-aged priest, proudly puffed up his chest, and after a moment, it collapsed again. In the former royal capital, these sands came from the purest white beach. The sea outside the beach would emit pure blue light at night. It was the long hair of the mother of the ocean. Moreover, the white beach would also be mixed with sacred pink conch. He sighed sadly. Those pink conches that only come from the northern coast can no longer be found. Even if we replace them with conches made of gold and silver, we can't perfectly harness the power of Mother Ocean as before. By the way, what are you trying to do to tap into the power of the ocean on a plateau of more than 3,000 meters? Greet looked sideways. Just after these few words, the conch trumpet was blown high for the second time, and a row of long sedan chairs were carried into the square by the attendants. There is a person sitting on top of each sedan chair. No, as the sedan came a little closer, Greet narrowed his eyes slightly. They were not living people, but mummies dressed in gorgeous costumes. Their remains were dehydrated and embalmed and preserved quite completely, with each person's facial features clearly visible. From the top of the sedan, a thin piece of black smoke hangs down, and the sedan curtain generally blocks the blazing sunlight from the ceiling. And these mummies were sitting quietly on the low stools in the center of the sedan, looking at the outside world through the curtain of the sedan. They are really watching, really reacting to everything in the outside world. Gretel didn't even need to use his mental energy to feel the inexplicable pressure coming from the mummies. Well, the ecstasy of Black Crow Swamp. Greet could almost imagine how Brother Lin would be salivating if he saw these mummies here, or if Archmage Heinz, who presides over the research institute in Eagle Country, were here. Probably, he would empty out his treasures and pay whatever price he could, and also want to get a mummy for study, right? These are the ancestral kings of the kingdom. Beside them, the sun priests stood up respectfully, bowing their heads in silence. And among the attendants and servants who followed, one by one, they were already prostrate on the ground. Dear distinguished guests, please show your respect to the late king. Gretel pouted and stood up. The sedans passed one by one, and next to each sedan were 4 attendants, holding long feather dusters dyed bright red, pretending to brush away the mosquitoes and flies that came up. Although in Greet's opinion, these actions were completely unnecessary. He had already seen several insects falling silently into the black smoke outside the sedan. These undead creatures are not weak. Behind the sedan, in addition to the attendants, there were also nobles wearing gorgeous robes, gold bracelets and gold earrings, serving their monarch like ministers. These sedan chairs were lifted one by one and landed at various locations in the square, as if they were guarding the entire square. After the mummy's palanquin, the sacred conch trumpet was blown a 3rd time. This time, Gretel saw a particularly ornate and complicated high priest, holding a long wooden staff, slowly walking out of the crowd. He stood in front of the crowd, opened his arms, and raised his head to the sky. "Oh, son, our father!" he shouted. The surrounding crowd fell silent, one by one, bowing their knees in worship, like waves of wheat blown down by the wind. Among the crowd, only one person stood still and walked step by step to the high priest. "This is the king. Bow down." The sun priest lowered his voice as he prompted. Gretel didn't want to argue with him, so he lowered his head slightly and tried to look up. Sarala already said hey. He's not wearing a crown. He wears royal tassels. Greet pulled the silver dragon girl and asked her to show her superficial respect. Udian's explanation has already sounded slowly in the spiritual connection. Sarala, look at the red ribbon wrapped around his head. It is made of the best alpaca hair, mixed with the feathers of condors, red parrots, umbrella birds, and many other kinds of monsters. Made. Cyrilla narrowed her eyes and looked over carefully. He looked up and down, looked around, and muttered. Not very strong. It's just a monster. The force response on this strap is not strong at all. If she catches this level of monsters by herself, she can catch dozens of them in a day, which is not enough to squeeze through her teeth. Each country has its own customs. In this country, only this red belt is the symbol of the king. And you see, the cloak on his body is as delicate as silk. This is a small robe specially made for the royal family. Alpacas, only sun virgins can weave. Cyrilla snorted and stopped talking. The high priest chanted a long sacrificial verse and pointed at the king. Great sun god, our father. Please let your sons become conquerors and plunderers of all mankind. We revere you and offer sacrifices to you. Please also grant our requests and let us enjoy prosperity and happiness. Amidst the chanting, the pure white alpacas were led forward one by one and pushed to the ground. The bronze knife in the priest's hand slit their throats and let their blood spray into the stone trough. Blood trickled into the stone basin below. Greed frowned and looked around. The aura of the undead became turbulent. The mummy kings sitting around the square opened their eyes one after another, greedily absorbing the power of death. A pure white alpaca with at least level 5 magical beast power that is specially raised for sacrifice. Their blood, their life force, rose upward like smoke. Half of it is thrown into the mummy king's palanquin, and the other half rises, rises, rises. Something is coming. Something opened its eyes, happily, greedily, sucking in the power. The entire square seemed to darken, then seemed to get brighter, filled with a thin mist of blood. After the alpaca, there are various other monsters. A big fish as tall as a person caught from the sea. Gretel couldn't imagine how such a big fish could be delivered to the royal capital alive. When unfolded, the shell is huge enough for an adult to lie down inside. Then to the burly and majestic jaguar, to the macaw with bright feathers, to all kinds of big birds. All kinds of magical beasts that Gretel could think of and couldn't imagine, had their throats cut, their blood drained, and their hearts cut open one by one. The power in the square boiled more intensely, and the expressions of the priests became more and more nervous. On the magic staffs in their hands, the ribbons automatically connected to each other without wind, as if forming a huge barrier. Stopped at the edge of the square, in front of the king and nobles who were watching the sacrifice. These are the people who believe in you. This is not a sacrifice for you. Get out. Go back to the center of the square. Gretel clearly felt that some boiling power was about to pounce on the noble, but he retracted under the obstruction of the ribbon of the staff. They pounced on the sacrifices and ate and drank. Those strong and fleshy monsters shriveled up visibly to the naked eye, and even turned into grey smoke, scattering on the ground. Of course, in the center of the square, the clergymen who perform sacrificial tasks can only rely on themselves. The divine robes on each priest's body glowed with a faint golden light, as if they could not protect themselves otherwise. Working in pairs, they dragged the slaves as human sacrifices to the center of the square and forced them to kneel down. There, a burly priest swung a heavy bronze battle axe and chopped off the slave's head with one blow. Or, cut their bodies in half and let their blood dye the white sand red. Some human animals had their limbs cut off, their bodies dismembered, their stomachs disemboweled. Some human beings cannot even die immediately, but have to toss and moan and endure great pain. Greed frowned, feeling the boiling atmosphere in the center of the square and above the square. It seems that the pain itself can provide strength to the gods who enjoy the sacrifice. The more pain there is, the more obvious the heavy pressure from the gods becomes. Gretel frowned. Whether it was the teacher, Elder Wood, Elder Tapras, or Elder Fahim, they all complained to him. A god who relies on blood sacrifices to survive would basically be at the end of his rope if he were not young. Is the situation of the sun god very bad? No matter what he thought, the sun god was still enjoying his sacrifices comfortably. Finally, bronze, golden light like the setting sun fell on the entire square. The blood, smoke, white sand, and even the gold and silver sculptures on the white sand were all swept away. The golden light burped, became slightly brighter, and walked leisurely around the square. Suddenly, it shined through the window lattice, sweeping away the barrier previously released by Rosia, and gently enveloped Greed. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of